Hi, this is Wayne Trammell from the Remote Leadership Institute, and today on the show, we're going to talk about being a great leader regardless of where your people are in this time of people working from home and the world feeling like it's changing. How does being a leader not change, and what's new and different?
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. I'm your host, Dov Baron, the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Let me ask you, in what ways do you need to up-level your leadership? Were you, or are you, prepared for the remote workforce revolution? Because if you don't work it out, life may change in ways that are far more dramatic than you are prepared for. Now remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Simply look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And also, we want to thank you. Because of you, we are the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also catch us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. So again, I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Let's strip it down and dive right in. In the first quarter of 2020, the world made an unplanned hard left turn, and companies that had very strict rules about how and when to work in the office suddenly found that to survive, they would have to go remote. But how? If you've resisted the changes that have been coming for a long time, then you've mostly been taken massively off guard. So remote is here. Do you know how to develop the competencies and manage the performances? And most importantly, do you know how to lead with a remote workforce? If you have resisted the inevitable, you may be asking, is it too late? Or can you pivot and flourish? Well, stay tuned because we're about to find out. Our guest today has the answers to those questions and about how you can change your business. Our guest on this episode is Wayne Trammell. Now, Wayne is the co-founder of Remote Leadership Institute. Did you get that? The Remote Leadership Institute. And it wasn't started in March of 2020 or even February or even January. And he's the author of several books, including The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. He's mildly obsessed with the way people communicate at work and has made it his life's work. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the man Marshall Goldsmith called one of the most unique voices in leadership, Mr. Wayne Trammell.
We got to give a Kermit wave.
Yay! Good to have you here, mate.
Yes.
And what people don't know is that you used to be in this part of the world where I am.
Yeah, I grew up in British Columbia.
Yeah.
And now live in Las Vegas through a torturous path, far too long and complicated to relate. But yeah.
So bottom line is you're remote to you.
I am remote to myself and my entire family, yes.
So where we like to start, Wayne, is by asking a simple question, which is, sort of a unifying one for all of us, which is who has been someone who we might not know or might not even consider, who's been a major influence on your leadership? I mean, obviously somebody like Marshall Goldsmith, who endorsed you, is an obvious pick, but who's somebody we might not know who's really impacted you or we might not consider?
The obvious answer, and one that I'm a little embarrassed because it's so trite, is my own colleague and co-author, Kevin Eikenberry, who I've known for these many years, long before we worked together, the author of Remarkable Leadership. He's regularly on the list of leadership speakers and writers. And in times like this, it's really interesting to watch him lead our organization and just walk it like he talks it consistently. It's a little intimidating, actually, but he is just superb. There are a lot of...
One thing you've learned from him, you know, what's the one thing that really stands out for you that you've gotten from him as an impact in the way you lead?
I think it's his commitment to, it's always people first. And it's not that you don't take care of business. It's not that you don't have the hard conversations, but he always leads from such a place of, well, we had a meeting this morning and he just kept reiterating that, yes, you know, these are weird times and we have to make the business work and we have to be responsible. And we are still driven by the vision and mission of helping people be better leaders. And he means it. It's not just, you know, word salad or something that looks good on a mission statement. He lives it every day. And that inspires the rest of us, honestly.
That's beautiful. Now, as I said in the introduction, you know, in the first quarter of 2020, the world took a hard left. And people that had resisted remote were suddenly thrown into it. You guys wrote the long distance leader not in January of 2020. So tell us a little bit about that book, why you came up with that book, why that was the title, and how long that's been around.
Well, the long distance leader came out in June of, help Mr. Wizard, 2018. It was a year ago, June 2019.
Right.
And we have been working together. The Remote Leadership Institute is about 5 years old now, and it was made up of Kevin's Remarkable Leadership organization, but also the company that I had been running for 10 years, looking at virtual communication and how do we make this work. And about 5 years ago, we brought our companies together because the world was asking a lot of questions about this leadership thing is great, but I'm not in the same room, the same country, the same time zone as the people that I lead, and can you make this work? So this has been something that I have been obsessed about, the virtual piece of this for nigh on 15 years. The book came about because people were asking these questions. You know, I've been serious about my leadership journey. I take it very seriously, but this feels weird. This feels different. And there was a lot of stress. Good managers were stressing out and working far too hard. And I don't mean that working hard is bad, but a lot of people were making the transition to virtual teams work through brute force. You know, they were the ones taking the hit when it comes to time zones and always being connected and not being able to strike any kind of balance with your life. And frankly, when the team had questions, taking them all on themselves and instead of doing what a leader would do normally, which is go ask Bob.
Right.
Right? Go ask Alice. But instead, they're coming and you're going, all right, I'll answer them even though it's 10:30 at night and I should have long been in bed. So it was really to address that question about why does this feel so awkward?
So first of all, I mean, what does it feel like to, the Remote Leadership Institute? What does it feel like to be ahead of the curve? Are you feeling a bit like Psychic Sue right now?
It's funny. I've actually had this conversation not too long ago. There's part of me that is just incredibly frustrated. Go, we've been telling you people this for years. Sure. But the other part is, and this is where today's conversation with Kevin, I think, came in, is I feel a little bit like a war profiteer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like suddenly I possess all the guns and now you have to come to me.
Yeah.
And it's important that we maintain our vision and our mission and our purpose for this. We're giving away a lot of content. We're doing a lot of new things for this right now to get people over the hump. But one thing we've learned, and we've learned this in the past, or should have, is once the remote work genie is out of the bottle in an organization, it's really hard to put back in. And I'll give you an example.
Tell us what you mean by that, because I think I know what you mean, but I really want to hear what you think about it.
Give you a perfect example. During Hurricane Harvey in Houston, we had a client, big insurance company, did lots of traditional leadership stuff with them. They were like, nope, our culture is everybody's in the office. We want the call center next to the salespeople, next to whatever. We've got this huge facility, and this is the mothership. Mm-hmm. And then the hurricane hit, and the call center was under 2 feet of water. And so they immediately had to scramble and send people home. And then once the carpets were dry and the mold was gone, they said, okay, come on back. And people didn't radically embrace that. I mean, a lot did. A lot of them were happy to have a job to go back to, and they missed working with their peers and the culture that had been created. But a lot of people went, it's an hour commute to the office. Can I do this 1 day a week work from home thing? Obviously, we've proven we can make it work. And so the companies had to re-examine its hard and fast rules about who can work remotely and who can't. And so that's what I mean by the genie's out of the bottle. If you look at SHRM, Society for Human Resource Managers, will tell you that the ability to work from home is one of the most requested perks above significant pay raises.
Yes.
For people.
Yeah, absolutely. And now it's been forced. Do you think that as we move forward, and I don't have any illusion that things will go back to normal. I don't think that exists. But as things become more normalized, do you think that what percentage of the workforce do you think that used to work in the office is going to move towards being just remote? Do you have any sense of that?
That's going to vary so much,
of course,
industry by industry. And my barber was telling me a couple of weeks ago that until people can mail them their heads, work from home is not an option. We're seeing it though. The U.S. Government is radically increasing, like to 60% and above, depending on the department, people's ability to work from home.
Right.
They're moving entire departments out of Washington, D.C. FDA is going to Omaha. FBI, interestingly enough, a lot of their support staff are going to Alabama, with the notion that there will be smaller offices there and that people will be working more from home. And so, by the U.S. government's own employees, we're talking about 60% or more.
Right. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting time looking back 5 years to where we are today.
Well, I don't think anybody really knows what it's going to look like, except that the opportunity, as always with change, and leaders need to know this, the opportunities pretty much balance out the challenges. For example, there are a lot of states down here, and I wish I knew the Canadian equivalent, but there are a number of states down here that are looking at remote work as the future savior of small towns.
Mm. Right.
That you no longer have to have that talent drain of your kids graduate high school, move to the city to go to school, and then never come back.
Right. Yeah, they can. So what do you, as we move into this, as I said, the remote work is in many ways not really an option. It's the only option for many companies right now, with social distancing, at least, or shelter at home. So what are some of the challenges that, you've been doing this a long time and your company's been helping other companies with this. And I sort of want to get ahead of this for our audience and say, okay, I know there's obvious things like security issues, right? And making that kind of thing. But what do you see as some of the real challenges that most people are not thinking about in the context of leading remotely?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things. First is we need to take a breath. There's this feeling that leading remotely is this entirely new thing, and there's this whole new skill set that we need to develop. And I am kind of reminded that Genghis Khan ruled half the world and never held a WebEx meeting.
That's true.
The British East India Company had a lousy email system.
Right.
Julius Caesar did great out in the field. It's when he went back to the home office that things went sideways. Yes. So it's always been
It was
doable.
Definitely a hostile takeover when he got back.
Things did not go well. So I think it's important that we remember that at the end of the day, the work is the work. Leadership is leadership. If you stop and think about what is the correct leadership behavior or mindset at this moment, it's a little bit easier to make that adjustment. When we wrote Long Distance Leader, it always seemed like we were stating the obvious, and yet it didn't seem to be. That's the beauty of business books that work, right? Mm-hmm. We had 19 rules for leading remotely, and rule number 1 was think leadership first, location second. Because what we've discovered, and we've got models and all kinds of stuff to demonstrate this, but if you think about the job of leadership, whether they're in the same place or not, the job doesn't change. We need to delegate. We need to manage performance. We need to inspire. We need to coach. What's different is that we are doing that mediated by technology. Yes. And doing it in ways that are not natural to us, right? Our natural instinct when we want to communicate is to be face-to-face, eye-to-eye, and the more important the conversation, the more we crave that because it gives us the ability to communicate on a much higher level, right? You read the body language and the facial expressions and all of that good stuff. Well, now we can't. Right? We're mediated by technology. And I'll give you a number which I geek out about, and I don't understand why people don't think this is the most important thing ever, is for the first time in human history, over the last 30 years since email became a thing, over 75% of business communication now takes place in writing. That has never happened in the history of the human race.
75% takes place in writing?
75% of workplace communication takes place in writing. Emails, text messages, instant messaging. When you're working from home, ask the people who work from home, unless their job is, call center operator. Ask the people how often you actually have a verbal conversation with another member. What percentage of your day is engaged in actually talking to other people? And people will tell you, I go days without having a real person-to-person, voice-to-voice conversation. And depending on your work style and the type of work that you do, that can, it allows you to get stuff done. What happens, Harvard Business Review did a pretty famous study, And the question was, do people who work from home get stuff done? And the answer is, yeah, they get a lot of stuff done.
More than get people. More done. They're more productive, generally speaking.
Well, the productive is an interesting word because they get more tasks completed, certainly, than people who work in the office. But what does it mean to be more productive, right? Is it how many tasks you check off your list? Is it the quality of your work? Is it, and what the study found is people get really, really focused on their work and the stuff that's directly in their control. And so tasks get done, deadlines get met, all of that good stuff. What doesn't happen is the collaboration, the brainstorming, the sharing of information. That doesn't happen. The other reason people who work from home get more done, and leaders need to take this into account, is because they work longer hours.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't have that commute to give your day a formal start and end. You roll out of bed, you check your phone, while you're eating your cornflakes, you're answering email and doing what you do. And then the kids are in bed and, well, I got this email, so let me go answer. The structure of the day. So they might get more stuff done, but they're also working longer hours. And, on one level, great. We're paying them and we're getting all their time, and it's unsustainable over time.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I was just going to say. So it's, in a lot of the research I read around this is that as you said, people are getting more stuff done. The challenge is that most people outside be working remotely do not operate inside of the same structure of time. Right. And for millennials, who are the largest workforce, that's pretty great because a lot of them have recognized that their most productive hours are between 10 a.m. and 1 a.m. And as the owner of the company or the boss or the leader, you don't care. What you care about is getting the work done. The challenge is if there is that blurring that becomes too blurred, and then the person is ending up working 14, 16 hours a day in order to get the task done. And then you've got another version of burnout. Now you've got remote burnout.
Well, interestingly, people who work remotely are at higher risk of turnover. And the reason is kind of interesting. In the first 6 months or so that they work from home, you are not going to find a more loyal, engaged, connected workforce because they're so glad to be there. They don't have to commute. They don't have to do all of that. But over time, that becomes the normal, right?
Yeah.
Well, then here's the thing. If I'm mad at my boss and I think maybe I'll see if the grass is greener somewhere else. If I go into the office every day, there's a barrier to changing my job. My commute changes, my routine changes, a lot goes on. If I work from home and I want to go to another job, the only thing that changes is my network login.
Right.
My lifestyle doesn't change one little bit.
No.
And so if we are not doing all the things we need to keep people engaged, and we know that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers and all of that, if there are no barriers to people leaving, they will vote with their feet.
Yeah. So how, from what you guys have been doing for so long, how do you keep these remote people more loyal? Because, as you know, Wayne, I wrote the book Fiercely Loyal, and I talked about a lot of things. And one of the things I talked about there was the futility of money, that throwing money at people to try and keep them loyal really is pretty futile these days, because millennials actually prefer to work for smaller companies. They don't like a boss looking over their shoulder. That's why they like remote work. But what have you, when you talk about the remote workers are more likely to jump ship, how are you and your company recommending that we keep them loyal?
People haven't changed that much. People still, they want to think their work matters. They want to believe that they're doing interesting work. They want to know that there's a career path. For example, one of the things that HR organizations are dealing with is that people who work from home often are looked at as, okay, you've chosen lifestyle over the career path. So the promotion is going to go to the person who's going into the office every day.
Right.
Right. Now, some people do legitimately say, you know what? I just want to do my work. I'm an engineer. Let me do my thing. I don't care about all of that. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not universally the case. And do you have a way for people who work remotely to see a future in that organization? Right? The mission, the vision of the company still matters.
Yes.
My kind of go-to example is always insurance companies. The ones that I've seen that just churn and burn and struggle to keep people, particularly remotely, are the ones who my job is to fill out a T17 form, and that's it. I just fill out T17 forms all day. The people who say, no, we help people get money when they're sick, and we make sure that people see doctors, and that's exciting for me, and I understand why I do this, they stay loyal.
Right.
You know, so much of it is not that different than when people are all together. It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of the little things that make a difference. The other thing I think that is really important, and this is the thing about remote work that people are going through right now when we're in the midst of this, is that North Americans spend 60% of their social activity with people from work.
Yeah.
Sometimes at work, but you grab a beer afterwards or whatever. Almost 30% of marriages in the 90s started in the workplace, either with a coworker or somebody's sister, met somebody else.
Work. Yeah.
Because it's such a huge part of our social life and our network and who we know. And now all of a sudden we're taking people who are highly socialized and they work together, and suddenly we're not social anymore. And there are a lot of people kind of freaking out by that. They're feeling very isolated and very lonely. Well, to get back to the loyalty thing, how do you keep people loyal? We are loyal to people. We are loyal to the people that we build relationships with. Yes, we're loyal to the organization if the mission and vision is there and we feel like we're being treated well. And it's the people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I no longer feel connected to the people I work with, then the loyalty is not going to be there. How many of us have stayed in a lousy job because we like the people we work with?
Of course. Yep. That's what it is. Yeah.
And the same is true. And people always say, well, when you're working on a remote team, it's not the same and you can't build those kind of relationships. People are getting married after connecting on Facebook. People build online relationships. I will tell you that as a writer, some of my most trusted colleagues and critics are people that I've met online and developed relationships with.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with somebody recently where I said, if 10 years ago you'd have told me you will have a brother, and by that I mean a heart brother, soul brother, or a heart or soul sister, that you've never physically hugged, I would have said you're insane, because I'm very tactile, very kinesthetic. I hug people, I kiss them, and I have brothers and sisters who I've never physically met, that I've had relationships with for 3, 4, 5 years, like this, through Zoom or through some remote process. And, I meet them on a regular basis. In fact, I meet them more often than my friends who live in the same city. So it's very interesting. So I think that that's one of the key things that I'm talking about with leaders now, is that how do you bring people together while being remotely distant? And this is, very important for us to continue growing business and to grow our companies, is how do we bring people together while they're remotely distant?
Yeah, it's going to be the trend of the future. Kevin has is kind of on this hobby horse that we call it social distancing. And it's not, it's physical distancing. What you're looking for is social connectedness while being physically distant.
Yeah.
And that is an important distinction, not to be all semantic about it.
It is, though. You're right. So in the practicality of it, you know, and again, this is your specialty. How do we develop the competencies? Wow, that was a bad word. Competencies and manage performance at a distance as leaders?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the question always goes back to what do leaders do anyway, right? And it's the expectations that you set and the metrics that you use. A big one, and this is going to be tougher for some industries than others, is the moving away from measuring activity and measuring outcomes. So, you know, you already alluded to this notion of, does it matter if that finance report gets written at 10 o'clock at night or 9 to 5, as long as it's available for the meeting on Friday? And for that kind of work, the answer is it doesn't.
Right.
Now, there is certain work where if I'm an IT help person, somebody's got to be there, right? If you're in customer service, somebody has to be there to answer the phone at certain times. So every industry, every organization is going to measure things differently. But ultimately, we need to set very clear expectations about what does the job entail, what does success look like, and make sure that we're really measuring outcomes and not activity, right? Is the activity we need to have somebody on the phone all the time, or is it that when the customer calls, somebody answers?
Yeah.
Right? Those are two very different things. It means that you could have people in different time zones, servicing different time zones. There's a lot of things that can change. So what is the work to be done? How are you going to measure it? And then how are you going to intentionally create the same kind of working relationships, or as close as you can to it, as you've always done?
You know, the point that you keep bringing home, Kevin, that I just think is so very, Wayne, so important here is that, yes, things are different, but leadership is the same, right? And that we've just got to look at how do you apply the same leadership in a different environment, and that's all that's changed. The leadership is the same. The environment is different. We're going to take a little break, and when we do, we're going to come back and we're going to dig in a little deeper with Wayne Turmel, and who is, of course, as I talked about, is the from the Long Distance Leader and the Remote Leadership Institute. The Long Distance Leader is the book, and we're going to come back. We're going to want to talk about the 3 keys to remote empires, and you know, earlier, Kevin, you brought up the example of Genghis Khan. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. However, this episode is brought to you in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to how do we bring people together who completely disagree. This is exactly what your mind and your soul have been craving. It's a chance to sit in on real and sometimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people, including astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, entertainers, and even some folks that you might previously have thought of as being, well, let's just go with a-holes, who are actually truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com, that's DOVBARON.com, and you can find out how you can sink your teeth into another episode of Curiosity Bites. We're going to be back right now with Wayne Turmel. He is the co-founder of the Remote Leadership Institute. He is author of several books, including The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. And we're going to talk right now, let's jump back in about these, what you talk about is the 3 keys to remote empires. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, You know, I'm a big history geek, and so I'm always fascinated by the fact that nothing is really new. I mean, you know, the world continues to go in cycles, and if you go back far enough, somebody somewhere has already solved for the problem you're trying
Yes.
to fix.
Yeah.
And I thought about Genghis Khan and thought, okay, here's this guy who conquered half the known world, and how did he do it? And I realized that when you think about conquerors, Genghis Khan not only conquered all this territory, but after he died, the empire continued to grow and expand. Whereas Alexander the Great, 2 weeks after he died, the whole empire started shrinking and people went, screw this, I'm going back to Greece. And so what was the difference? Well, there were three things that the Roman Empire, and if you think about it, the British Empire under Victoria and all kinds of things. The first is there was a vision, there was a mission. They were doing something beyond just the boss told me so, which was the problem with Alexander. It was a cult of personality. And when the personality was gone, okay, there's no reason for me to be standing here on the border of Afghanistan, right? There's just, it doesn't make sense. So whether it makes sense to us now, 700 years later or not, the spiritual growth and the things that were going on with the Mongols at the time gave them a structure and a way of expanding that people bought into, right? And as people were conquered, they were brought into the system, and maybe they didn't believe in the stick with the horsehair that was giving the orders, but they sure believed in the system and the process and saw how this was going to be to their advantage. So there's a vision, there's a reason, there's a why are we doing this? And it's one that people can buy into. The second thing is there's accountability. Now, a lot of his techniques would not get past HR.
Really?
This is true. You
Don't
know?
do as you told me, just cut your head off. Oh.
Although I don't know about you, brother. I have seen people on my team and thought, where's an anthill when you need one? But I have resisted. I am a man of my time.
Probably a good idea.
I am an enlightened man of my time. But there was accountability. There was, here's what's expected. Here is what will happen if it doesn't. And it was all laid out. And it wasn't like people didn't know the rules.
Right.
And they weren't arbitrary. Frequently, Genghis would actually discipline his own generals because they weren't taking care of their people the way they needed to be taken care of, or they were kind of running their own little fiefdom. Stop me when this sounds familiar to anybody in corporate America, right? So the accountability, here's what's expected. This is what's going to happen if it doesn't. This is how we're going to fix it. And if we can't fix it, you know, it was literal termination.
Yeah.
The third thing, and this is where I have, and for a non-geek like me, I am seriously technophobic. This is where the aha is that one of the reasons that their empire expanded so much quicker than everybody else is technology. Now, when it started, their technology was basically horses and yurts.
Right.
The horses were specifically bred for going long distances across flat terrain. You know, they weren't pretty. They weren't the most beautiful horses you ever saw, but they could go a long way and they could pretty much outlast anybody they were chasing. The yurt was a tent, easily collapsible, that housed multiple people that could be knocked down in minutes, easily transported and moved. I mean, they could move towns in mere hours. One of the things that they did that most people don't recognize is when they took somebody over, when they took over a village, a nation, a tribe, whatever, they would look at what do these people do well, and they would adopt the best practices of the people that they took over so that they were constantly getting smarter and better.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was really, really intriguing. When they encountered the Muslims, they discovered the stirrup.
Mm-hmm.
Up until then, they'd been riding their ponies bareback and, holding on to the mane and stabbing with the other hand. All of a sudden, they had the ability to maneuver and stand up, which gave you better leverage and stay in the saddle longer and all kinds of things. So there's just a really simple example. So there's a vision that they went after. There's accountability and process, which is rigidly adhered to. And there's the technology. And the technology is what makes working remotely different. As I said, the what of how we lead, the what we do doesn't change. You still got to coach, you still have to delegate, you got to do all that stuff. The how, though, has changed dramatically. And so if we are constrained, we've got this job which has never been easy, this leadership thing, and now we're doing it in ways that we are uncomfortable with. Maybe we're not using the right tool for the right job. Give you an example. I'm conflict avoidant, and it is really easy for me, rather than have a honest to goodness conversation with somebody, to wait until 4:59 and then send an email. It's not the right thing to do.
No.
But it's sure easy.
Right.
And it's fast, and I can say, yep, I told that person. I mean, to take this to the extreme example, and I wish I was kidding about this stuff, my wife was once fired by instant messenger.
Ooh.
Yeah, I wish I was kidding.
Yeah. That's less than
ideal, right?
Exactly.
But here's the thing. Some of it is our work style, right? We are conflict avoidant, or we're not techies and we're kind of hanging on by our fingernails, getting the job done. The problem is that we have all these amazing tools at our disposal. And we frankly either don't use the right tool for the right job, i.e., I have to coach somebody, but I'm going to send them an email.
Right.
Which the leader knows is not the right answer. But when I'm tired and cranky and worn out and I just don't want to deal with Bob, that's what's going to happen. The other thing is that if you look at tools like Zoom, for example, Zoom, Skype, WebEx, pick the tool of your choice, 80% of people use 20% of the features.
Usual.
Right, exactly. That's the usual thing. But here's the deal. This is our lifeline. So if I know as a leader that face-to-face, in-person coaching is the best thing for this situation, and I just hate using my webcam, or I haven't bothered to learn how to use the tool very well, I am limiting my ability to do the kind of coaching that I know as a leader I should be doing.
Yes.
The objections, and this, you asked me about a change that's going to come as a result of this current thing, is the objection to webcams is going to largely go away. I have spent 5 years telling people to use their webcam, and I can give you every excuse in the world why they don't.
Including, oh, mine doesn't work. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
It's all of them. And right now, if I can get semi-serious for just a minute, one of the ones that sounds trivial is, my office is a mess. I just got back from the gym. The kids are running around. And so I'm not going to use my webcam. And we've allowed that excuse. And true, if you're dealing with the CEO or you've got a big client on the line, you need to look professional, and I get that. But if it's just Alice and Terry talking about the project, it doesn't matter. And right now, as a leader, we need to be sensitive to what's going on in people's worlds, right? I've sent you home to work, but you weren't planning to work from home. You don't have a nice, comfy office with a door. You're working off the north end of the dining room table. You don't have 9 to 5 by yourself surrounded by professionals. You've got 2 kids bouncing off the wall and a husband who's also working from home.
Mm-hmm.
If I, as the leader, don't know what you're working with
Mm-hmm.
in terms of your circumstances, it ain't going to work.
Right.
If I'm expecting you to be at your desk at a certain time when the kids are bouncing off the wall and the dog just threw up in the living room, my head is not going to be in the game. And the more you press for me to be there and pay attention and not take care of that other stuff, the more tension there's going to be.
Right. But Wayne, right now, how do we solve that problem? Because that is right in leaders' faces right now, because there are people who are working remotely who had planned for that. They have an office, they have an isolated area, and most people, certainly today, as we record this, have gone home to work thinking it's fairly semi-permanent and are working off the dining table with the kids and the dog, and on the other end of the dining table is their partner doing pretty much the same, trying to manage all of that. So how do we deal with that?
The first thing is there needs to be a real honest conversation around what is the expectation.
Right.
What is the work that needs to get done? And I guarantee you the work that is mission critical and the work that needs to get done is not the same as it was when everybody was sitting in the cube farm.
Mm.
Certain things are now got to be done, non-negotiable. This needs to happen. This is a nice to have. When we get a moment, we'll get this, we'll handle it. And then, you know what? This ain't going to get done for a while, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But the longer we go and the more people kind of get settled into a routine, those are going to change. So when you went home, this was job one, and this is what we were going to do, and this is how it was going to work. Well, guess what? It's not working the way we thought it was, and the job is different, and circumstances change. So there needs to be constant discussion, check-in, and agreement around what is the non-negotiable, what does have to happen, where do we have room, where can I cut you some slack? Because I guarantee you there are people listening to this right now, Dov, who are saying, you know, we sent everybody home and we thought it was going to be a car wreck, but it's actually gone pretty well. Everybody's pulling together and we're making it work and nothing's gone off the rails yet. And I hate to be the prophet of doom, but I think what's happening is we are currently in a honeymoon stage where people understand the dynamic, everybody's pulling together, we're making this work, we're all in this together, come on team, we can do this. And so there's this pot of goodwill that people are feeding off of.
Mm-hmm.
The longer people are home with the kids, the more they realize, hey, my boss isn't giving me the same attention I was getting when I was in the office. Or what do you mean I'm not getting a bonus this month? Or whatever, right? The longer it goes, the more it's going to start to fray. And that's when leaders are going to have to step up. So if we just rely on everybody's goodwill, best intentions, man, you're placing a big bet.
Right. So
So
you brought up a couple of things that I want to, there's a lot we could unpack in there, but one of the things you brought up was in passing, which was that you're a technophobe. I know because you and I have had conversations before we went to air, and the conversation is that you were originally not from a leadership background. You didn't go to university and get degrees in these things, yet you've ended up writing about leadership and working and developing a company that's built on remote leadership. Remote implies technology, So here we've got a guy who did not go to university for leadership and who is a technophobe talking about remote leadership. Help us out.
Well, okay.
Before they start throwing rotten tomatoes at you.
So without going through the whole biography,
Sure.
you know, I left with a 2-year associate's degree burning a hole in my pocket to spend 18 years as a stand-up comic.
Right.
That was my background. That's what I was doing. When the wife and child insisted on eating, I did a series of horrible jobs really badly until I found the training industry, which had the one skill I possessed, which is I could stand there and talk.
Right.
Right? You find what works for you. Couple of things. One is that I have always been passionate about learning and helping people succeed. Mentoring, leadership has always kind of been in my DNA. And the other thing is, and this comes as a shock to people, books are cheap. There are always people out there willing to help you learn. There are tons of resources if you choose to take advantage of them. And as I started to become more and more fascinated by particularly the communication side, all of a sudden people were asking me to write and speak on certain topics, which gave me the opportunity to get smarter still, and it started to build. And so after a while in my business career, I had gotten pretty smart about this whole speaking, communicating thing. And then somebody said to me one day, gee, Wayne, presentation skills are great, but you know, I only talk to people like once a quarter. And I said, what do you mean? Well, there's this thing called WebEx. And I realized that nobody was taking into account that this was a different animal. This was a different type of communicating.
Right.
And so I got out ahead, and some of this was my own curiosity. Some of it was the need to make a living, but I kind of got ahead of that. The thing about technology is that although I don't like technology particularly, I am really lazy.
Right.
And if there is a way to do a job that is easier than the way I'm doing it now, I will make myself comfortable with it. And
Right.
I think that my discomfort with technology and my struggling to learn a new tool enables me to be a better communicator and teacher of how to use those things.
I think that's a good point. That's a good point. Wayne, as we wind towards the end of the show, one of my questions is that I like to leave our audience with is because all this is conceptually nice. And I'm a great believer in information. Information is what the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application.
Right.
So as we sort of come to the end of the show, one of the things I would really love for you to do and obviously this is very relevant right now, what is a piece of practical guidance that you would give to our viewers, our listeners, about how to be an effective remote leader right now in this brand new world that they're all living in, and at the same time with the understanding that this may be, as you very well pointed out, this may be the honeymoon phase?
Yeah, I think there are, okay, I'm going to give you, I think, 3 things, but remember, I'm making this up as I go, right? So I think there are 3 things. The first one is get used to being on webcam and do it now. And it's most important one-on-one. Team meetings are great, but you know, you got a whole bunch of pictures at the top of the screen and people are worried about being on screen and do they see me scratching my nose? Don't stress about that. The one-on-one communication is the single most important thing. So if you haven't yet, schedule one-on-one webcam calls with every member of your team. Because the number one factor in whether a team adopts a technology is if the boss uses it.
Yes, that's true.
So you're the leader, lead. I don't care that you hate it. I don't care that you're not comfortable. Make it happen. Webcam's number 1. Number 2 is plan for more frequent, shorter communication. You know, we say, oh, I schedule one-on-ones for an hour every 2 weeks with all of my team. That's great, except you don't really, because if people are in the office, yes, you take them into a space, you talk for an hour, you give them your time, but they also catch you in the parking lot and they stick your head in the door, and they have a lot of access to you.
Yeah.
Beyond just that hour. You know, if I have a call scheduled with one of my people for an hour, there may not be a lot of conversation between those meetings with that individual person. When we get together, it becomes super transactional. If you've ever said to somebody, okay, I know you're in a hurry, let's not waste time. So there's no conversations, there's no, hey, how's it going? There's no, how are the kids? It's, okay, here's my list, let's have your list.
Right.
The other thing when we work remotely is that we don't give people the same attention. You know, the guy in the office gets taken into the quiet room, you're sitting there, you're one-on-one, but if I'm talking to Jennifer, who's working in Toronto, I'm going to make that call while I'm driving through traffic or sitting in the airport waiting for my flight.
Right.
It's like it gets fit in between the cracks. And they know you're fitting them in between the cracks, right? The virtual meetings are always the first ones that get canceled.
Right.
So more frequent, shorter communication is going to keep that pot boiling much better. Webcams. The third thing is learn to run a meeting. Whether you're using Microsoft Teams or GoToMeet, I don't care what the platform is. Remember, 80% of people use 20% of the features, so it doesn't matter what tool you're using if you ain't using it. Stop and think. I ask people all the time, well, what would you do in a regular meeting? Well, I'd ask for a show of hands. You know, there's a button right there that says raise hand. Well, I like to use a flip chart. There's a whiteboard, and you can have as many of them as you want, and they never run out of ink. What is it that you would do in a regular meeting, and then how, using the technology at your disposal, can you get as close to that as possible?
Right. That's really great tips. And I've been advocating the first one a lot with people way before all this, which is you need to regularly meet with your people, and you can do it through webcams, and it doesn't have to be long. It can just be a check-in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be work-related. It can just be like, how you doing? I know you're juggling kids and dogs and work. Just tell me how you're doing.
If this sounds corny, believe me, I am the least corny, mushy human being I know. I'm a bit of a stoneheart. But last week we had a virtual lunch.
Yep.
Everybody met online. We had some silly party game that we did. And for an hour, everybody just checked in. And then we went back to work and did our thing. But we had checked in with every member of the team. And we did something social. And it was harmless. And it was just long enough that I was starting to get antsy and itchy. And then it ended and I went back to work.
Right.
So yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, these are great tips. Wayne, this has been a fabulous show. I really appreciate your insights and your clarity around clearly an emerging not only need, but really, I mean, we can't live any other way right now. So before we go, I would love for you to share with our audience, with our listeners and our viewers more about you, how people can get in touch with you, with your organization, with all the resources that you have available.
Sure. Remote Leadership Institute is remoteleadershipinstitute.com. If we'd known it was going to be so successful, we'd have come up with a shorter, easier to type URL, but there you go. There is a ton of free content, blogs. Actually, there's a link to a special COVID-19 page with lots of resources about working from home and helping people work from home. Twitter, Leading Remotely is the...
At Leading Remotely?
At Leading Remotely. is the Twitter page for the Institute. My personal Twitter is WTermel. There may or may not be silliness on that page, but you're welcome to join me. Yeah,
Okay, fabulous.
That's it.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. This was a great show, and I want to encourage you, dear listener, dear viewer, to go to the website and have a look around and go to the Twitter and all those kinds of things. What Wayne and his company are doing is really powerful and, like I said, more needed than ever right now. You can also hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've just been listening to or any past episodes by going to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. The bottom line is it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. Find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or for your organization by simply going to dovbaron.com, DOVBARON.com, because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragon fire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend, stay curious about how your leadership hasn't changed. Only the tools and the vehicles have. So show up and be a really powerful leader today so that your people become loyal, understanding that you actually care, whether they're right in front of you or at a distance. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragon fire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.